So hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you in this amazing event today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing in the past 7 years and give you a perspective of the progress that's been made in this space and where we need to be. So I don't need to tell you that digital health technologies offer incredible opportunities to quantitatively and passively measure the patient's health outcomes in their natural environment. So when patients come to the clinic, if we're, for example, interested in mobility, we are measuring a snapshot of their mobility capacity. Whereas when we monitor patients at home, we're really going at understanding their function, what they're really doing in their daily lives. And we have studies that show, including studies in our lab, that show when we monitored younger and older healthy adults in the clinic and asked them to do a walk task, we find no difference at all in their gait speed. But when we looked at their gait speed at home, we find that the older adults are significantly slower than the younger ones. And this is really the promise of digital health technology. It's really helping us obtain real-world evidence at high resolution of aspects of health that are meaningful to patients. They also enable us to capture early signs of efficacy of disease-modifying treatments, so they may be able to reduce the time to go on no-go decisions, reduce burden on patients and caregivers because some of the clinic visits can be replaced with remote assessments, and derive objective outcome measures that can reduce the sample size of our studies. And we're here with a decade of progress, some of you have contributed to in this field. So we have, in the past years, we've seen strong interdisciplinary communities like DIME, and Digital Medicine Society, and Digital In Vivo Alliance for the preclinical work. We've seen consortia like MobileISD, for example, and IdeaFast that collected thousands of data from thousands of patients about mobility and gait and sleep measures at home. And we've also seen tremendous amount of publications and research conducted on this topic. There's also been strong interest from regulators. So there are strong guidance, draft guidance, and an actual finalized guidance on the use of DHTs and remote data acquisition from the FDA. We've seen qualifications, like for example, the Apple Watch, the AFib history has been used as a secondary endpoint to monitor AFib burden after ablation devices. And we've also been seeing strong advances in AI/ML models and infrastructure. Now we can really process vast amount of data coming down from these wearable technologies in conjunction with text, imaging, and audio and video. So what do we do at Pfizer? So at Pfizer, we have a staged approach of how we introduce wearable technologies in drug development. So we have in Cambridge, where I stay and work, we have a Pfizer Innovation Research Lab, which is intended to help us really test devices and collect healthy volunteer data, both adults and pediatrics, so that we can develop algorithms to derive endpoints of, say, gait, physical activity, etc. We then develop clinical methodology in target patient population. So if we want to deploy in a certain specific patient population, like cachexia, which I will show you the results later, we first do clinical methodology studies to understand these endpoints, these novel digital endpoints in that patient population. And then we deploy in interventional clinical trials, usually as exploratory, and then move on to secondary or co-primary. And the last bit of work that we've been doing recently is really looking into how can we expand some of these measures into clinical care. So this is the lab. It's a GCP compliant lab. It's clinically approved space where we get our information, and we test devices to really understand how do they compare with ground truth measures of gait, for example. How does the in-clinic data compares to what we obtain at home, and then also use ground truth and well-controlled data to be able to develop algorithms and really assess the procedures reliability, etc. So what we do really is a staged approach where we choose the fit-for-purpose DHTs, take continuous multimodal data collection at home after the lab, apply algorithm development such as statistics, machine learning techniques on this data, derive the endpoint, do analytical and clinical validation so that we can have a qualified endpoint of disease at the end of the process. And I'll give you an example of how we did this with gait and physical activity in free living condition. So first, we always start, where is the unmet need? And we decided to look at gait and physical activity because gait speed has been referred to as the sixth vital sign. It can predict, for example, survival, hospitalization, and all-cause mortality in diseases like heart failure. And also, there's been some endpoints that's been qualified by the EMA and also by the FDA on gait and physical activity. So for example, the 95th percentile stroke velocity has been qualified by the EMA as a primary endpoint for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and MVPA has been qualified by the FDA as a primary endpoint for pivotal cardiopulmonary study. So what we do in the Fire Lab is we collect gait data, okay, but we also collect data during other activities, so that we can develop algorithms to say, when is a participant walking versus not? So that is context detection. And then after context detection, when we identify periods of gait, we then extract spatiotemporal characteristics of gait. For example, gait speed or stride time or stride velocity, etc. And then we validate them against ground truth because we have a mat. We have a mat that have many sensors and can actually give us the precise spatiotemporal features. So once we have these very good idea and understanding of how these measures perform, how well we can measure gait, right? We then deploy them in patient populations. So a couple of years ago, we've deployed gait and physical activity endpoints in a phase 1b study of ponsegromab, which is a monoclonal antibody that targets GTF15 in cancer cachexia. And we've seen an improvement in the gait speed for patients on ponsegromab. So then we decided to use these endpoints as secondary endpoints in a phase 2 study, which was just published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2024 in September. And in this study, patients had 12 weeks of treatment with ponsegromab. Gait and physical activity were measured as secondary endpoints during screening, during week 8 and 9, and during weeks 10 and 12. And we found that ponsegromab for 100 milligrams improved time spent in non-sedentary activity in cancer patients with cachexia. We also continue to understand through patient preference study what is the change, if that change is meaningful to patients, and what are the activities that really matter most to this patient population. One of the things that we've decided to do, and my group develops these algorithms, the gait and physical activity algorithms, and we actually developed a process called a pipeline called Quantitative Digital Health, which is there to enable automatic, efficient, and robust processing of the HD data. And we decided to open source a lot of this so that other companies can use the data. And we published a ton of papers on this package. And the idea was, we really want to make sure that the endpoints that we choose and our processes and pipelines can actually be leveraged to advance the field at large, not just us, because it will benefit patients in the long term. We continue to do validation on the data. So, for example, on these endpoints. So, for example, we've just published a study on validation of the gait metrics in pediatrics population, which is obviously an area of unmet need. There are very poor endpoints in pediatrics, and there is a lot of opportunity to have better measures that look at gait and physical activity, especially, for example, rare disease populations. And we also look at, as we deploy in clinical trials, we want to make sure that the solution that we provide is as streamlined and as easy as possible. So we do a lot of work on understanding what is the optimal device placement and how can we reduce the number of sensors that we deploy in studies. So for example, when we're interested in heart failure, we look at, can just a single chest-worn accelerometer give us data about heart rate, but also give us data about gait. So we apply our algorithms also on the wearable located, for example, on the chest, so that we can see how many features can we derive reliably from one location. Okay, so that's what we've done. And I want to spend the next a little bit of time talking about the opportunity and where we should be going next. So we are at a point now where we have a very good idea how to develop these endpoints. We have frameworks, we have guidance, but we are not seeing as much as we should see. Cases and case studies where these endpoints are used to make go, no-go decisions in drug development. And to change this, we need to really change the way we deploy these tools at scale in large interventional clinical trials. phase 3 trials, which are multi-site, multinational trials. So these are some of the considerations that I think we need to take into account to basically really scale up the use of DHTs. One is patients. Patients keep telling us we need to act with urgency. We need to really make sure that we are nimble in our development, and we need to learn from what we've done in the past to see how can we speed up the development of these endpoints, to speed up drug development, and derive endpoints that are meaningful. Another thing that we're working on right now is how can we share data back to patients from these DHTs so that they can make informed decision about their care. And the timing, of course, is of consideration, especially if you have interventional studies, but we run a lot of observational studies too. So I think we need to start thinking about how can we share data back to patients. Operations, we talk about patient centricity, but we also need to think about how can we be site-centric? So how can we make the process of introducing novel technology insights as easy as possible, not really target them with, bombard them with like thousands of passwords and very complicated setups for devices. Scalability is really important, how to train the sites, how to ensure that we have compliance. We can't assume that internet and broadband connectivity is ubiquitous and that everyone has access to it. It's not something we should assume. Data, I'm a statistician, it's close to my heart, really looking at data issues. We cannot expect that we're having 100% 24/7 data back from these devices, because patients are not going to wear the devices 24/7. But we have statistics on our side. We have the well-worn path of statistical methodology that tells us we can really use bootstrap techniques to understand what is the minimum amount of data we really need to make reliable decisions from sensor data. So how to handle missing data? Again, this is something that we've published on, and we need to have more conversations even with regulators about it. From a regulatory side, measures coming from these digital tools can be seen as biomarkers, but they also can be seen as clinical outcome assessments, and it's not sometimes clear which is the right qualification pathway. So we need to continue having these discussions to make sure that it's clear the evidence that we need to generate for these endpoints. And then return on investment. We've started to see cases where using digital technologies have enabled the sample size reduction of up to 50%. And that's huge for patients, right? Patients need breakthroughs fast. And if we manage to use these tools to reduce the sample size, that is a tremendous opportunity. And I think we need to do more of this return on investment modeling to really make the case of why we should be investing in this space. The last bit I want to mention, because there was a lot of talks today about clinical care, and I think when we develop these endpoints for clinical trials, we also need to think about how they can be deployed in clinical care. So I think these are some thoughts that I often think about. What information is important to patients and to providers? How will that information be shared or integrated in the EHR system? How will reimbursement work? And how can we ensure broad access to technology so that we don't create even more digital divide? How will safety concerns be addressed when you're monitoring patients 24/7, for example? And who or what will analyze the data, and at what frequency? Will there be quality controls, calibration, and verification? So I think those are things that we need to consider to really bridge the gap from clinical trials to clinical care. Okay, so in conclusion, DHTs coupled with AI and ML methodologies offer incredible opportunities to drug development and clinical care. We've seen tremendous progress being made in the past decade, and I'm proud that we contributed to some of this progress, and you've all done that. These tools are rapidly changing the way we're doing clinical trials. For example, the ponsegromab example that I've shown you was the first time that digital tools were used as secondary endpoints in this population. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and operationalizing at scale is always the top of my list. I think education and advocacy as well. We can't assume that everyone is well integrated and well read in this space as we are. So I think we need to educate the value of these tools, and really thinking also about how can we expand into clinical care. It takes a village. No research is possible without the time and effort of our participants. So special thanks to everyone who participates in research. And the work I shared today is really the work of a huge amount of people. Some of them are not even listed here. And thank you so much. I think I have my address at some point, but yeah, thank you.